It started with a letter, not a friendly one, the kind that smells like ink and arrogance, with notice of property violation printed in bold red across the top. When I tore it open, I expected the usual HOA nonsense, maybe a complaint about my mailbox paint or the height of my hedges. But this one hit harder. It said the land behind my house, my backyard, was no longer mine. Apparently, after a recent boundary adjustment, the HOA had decided that a 20-foot strip of my property was now common ground, belonging to the association. I laughed at first. Then I read the rest. They wanted me to remove my deck, my shed, and even the swing set I'd built for my daughter when she was 5. Or they'd start fining me $500 a week. That laughter? It died real quick. I'd lived here 15 years. I'd mowed that grass every Saturday. I'd poured concrete for that deck myself. My wife planted the flowers that bloomed every spring right on that so-called common ground. I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me, so I marched into the next HOA meeting. The air inside their little clubhouse was thick with coffee, perfume, and fake politeness. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where 5 board members sat, like judges. Linda Pearson, the HOA president, leaned forward with that plastic smile of hers. "Mr. Thomas, we appreciate you coming. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "Yeah," I said, tossing the letter on the table. "A big one. You're claiming part of my yard." "We're just following the new survey," she said, sliding a stack of papers my way. "The board voted last week. That area is now designated for community use." I stared at her. "You voted to take my property?" "It's not personal," she said sweetly. "It's procedure." The others nodded like obedient little parrots. I clenched my jaw. "Procedure doesn't change ownership. You can't just draw new lines on paper and call it yours." Linda's smile didn't falter. "If you don't comply, we'll take legal action." I looked around the room, at my neighbors avoiding my eyes, at the fake potted plants, at the community banner on the wall that read, "Together we grow." Yeah, we grew all right. Greed, power, and hypocrisy. That night, I stood in my backyard under the porch light, tracing my foot along the invisible line they claimed. My daughter's swing creaked softly in the wind. They thought a piece of paper could erase a lifetime of memories, but if they wanted a boundary, I'd give them one, a boundary they'd never forget. And that's when the idea hit me. Not a fence, not a protest. A wall, one they'd have to stare at every single time they met. By sunrise, I was already at the county records office. I didn't trust the HOA's so-called survey, so I pulled up the original property deed, the one my father signed when he handed me the house 15 years ago. Turns out the new boundary line wasn't even filed properly. It was nothing more than an internal HOA map, a manipulation dressed up as law. That's when I decided if they wanted to play with lines, I'd draw one they couldn't erase. "Tom, you've lost your damn mind," said Rick, my contractor buddy, squinting at the sketch I'd made on a napkin. "Maybe," I said, sipping my coffee. "But I'm not letting them walk all over me. I'm building a wall." Rick chuckled. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. 12 feet high, concrete, right along my property line. And guess what?" I pointed at the blueprint. "It cuts right through their precious meeting hall." He stared at me for a long second. Then he grinned. "You're insane." "I love it." The next morning, the rumble of cement trucks rolled through Maplewood Drive like thunder. Neighbors peeked through blinds. HOA members came running, waving clipboards and barking orders. Linda, in her floral blazer and perfect hair, charged toward me. "You can't do this!" she shouted. "Oh, I can," I said, handing her a copy of my original deed. "See this stamp? County verified. That means this ground," I stomped my boot on the dirt, "belongs to me." Her eyes flicked to the trucks. "You're building on our community land." I smiled. "Funny, the county says otherwise." By the afternoon, the digging began. Post holes turned into trenches. Rebar was set, concrete poured. Every swing of a hammer echoed across the neighborhood like a drumbeat of rebellion. Kids watched from porches. Someone started filming on their phone. The HOA called the police. But when the sheriff arrived and saw the paperwork, he just shrugged. "He's within his rights," he said. "Can't stop him." Linda's jaw nearly hit the pavement. 2 days later, the wall stood tall. Raw concrete, jagged and unpainted. And right through the middle of their newly built meeting hall, it sliced like a knife, half of their fancy room, the one they'd spent HOA fees remodeling, was now technically mine. The other half belonged to them. When the dust settled, I climbed a ladder and painted a mural on my side. A giant oak tree, roots curling deep into the earth, branches spreading wide. Across the trunk, I wrote in bold black letters, "You can't take what you didn't build." Neighbors stopped by to stare. Some smiled. Some whispered. But everyone felt it. Linda stood on the other side of the wall, silent. Her kingdom split in half, and for the first time since this fight began, I felt peace. They wanted boundaries. Now they had one. A week later, another letter showed up in my mailbox. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the county zoning office. Turns out, after I'd filed my complaint and submitted the original property deed, they'd launched a full review. And guess what? The HOA's boundary adjustment was never legally recorded. The so-called common land they'd claimed? Still mine. Every inch of it. The county inspector even came out in person, clipboard in hand. He stood beside my wall, nodding as he looked over the paperwork. "Looks like they built part of their meeting hall on your land. Mr. Thomas, they'll need to remove it or get your permission to keep it standing." I smiled. They won't be getting that permission. When the news hit, chaos followed. HOA members argued, fingers pointed, and resignation letters started flying. Linda stepped down first. By the end of the month, the board dissolved completely. Their meeting hall stood abandoned, half useless, half mine like a monument to arrogance. But something changed in the neighborhood after that. People started talking to each other again, not through HOA notices, but over fences, on porches, with real voices and laughter. We mowed each other's lawns, shared tools, fixed fences. It felt like a community again. One evening I was out back watering the apple trees when my son, Ethan, came over. He was 14, all attitude and curiosity. "Dad," he said, "did you really have to build that wall? Couldn't you have just sued them or something?" I looked at the mural on the wall, the oak tree I'd painted, its roots twisting deep into the earth. The sunlight hit it just right, making it glow gold. "Maybe I didn't have to," I said. "But sometimes people only understand what they can't ignore." That wall wasn't just for me. It was for every person who's ever been told to sit down and shut up when they were right. Ethan looked at the wall, then at me. "It's kinda awesome," he said, grinning. "You made your point." "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "But here's the thing, kiddo. It's not about winning. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to take what's yours." He nodded slowly, thoughtful. "So, the wall's not about keeping people out?" "No," I said, setting down the hose. "It's about reminding people what's worth protecting." Months later, new families moved into the neighborhood. Some of them asked about the wall during barbecues or block parties. And I'd tell them the story, how a group of people tried to claim something they didn't build, and how one man decided to draw a line they couldn't cross. Before they'd leave, I'd always finish with the same words. "Don't let anyone tell you what's yours, unless they helped build it." Then I'd glance at that wall, now covered in vines and sunlight, and think, maybe the real boundary wasn't made of concrete at all. It was made of courage. If someone's trying to take what's yours, your land, your voice, your worth, don't back down. Stand your ground. Build your wall. Because sometimes the strongest walls aren't meant to divide. They're meant to defend what matters.